Welcome to Healing Solidarity, the conference about reimagining international development. I'm Marianne Clements, initiator of this conference, writer and consultant, and facilitator of the Replenishment Room. And in this conversation, I'm talking with Eunice Baguma, who's the founder of the African Technology Business Network. In this conversation, we talk together about how the NGO sector might learn from technology and the way that technological organisations have been innovating in recent years. And we talk about how we might utilise the learning from those processes to come up with new approaches that could transform our work in the social justice sectors. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Eunice as much as I enjoyed having it. So hi and welcome back to Healing Solidarity. So I'm here with Eunice Baguma. So hi Eunice.
Hi Marianne. Hi.
Everyone. Hi, it's good to have you here. I'm just going to share something about the amazing woman that you are. So Eunice is a social entrepreneur, an author, and the founder of Africa Technology Business Network, which is a social enterprise and support community for innovators using technology to positively impact Africa. She's particularly passionate about empowering women through technology and entrepreneurship, and established Her Future Africa, a program equipping young African women with entrepreneurship skills, digital tools, and mentorship to establish their own businesses. She's also the author of Founding Women, a book sharing the inspiring stories of 20 African female entrepreneurs in technology. So, welcome, Eunice. I want to start by...
I'm excited to be on.
It's great being here with you. I want to start by asking you just to share a little bit about your journey and how you came to be doing all these things that you've been up to the past few years.
Right. So I'm originally from Uganda, now living in London. And in Uganda, I actually established a technology startup now almost 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't work out. And I felt that that was because there just wasn't enough support, particularly around if you wanted to do something with technology, because this was quite a new space and there's not enough understanding of the sector and therefore an investment going in. So that's something I was really passionate about. And I really see the potential of technology in terms of really creating new opportunities. In Uganda, where I'm from, this youth unemployment is as high as 80% among people under the age of 35. And this is not something that is like a statistic for me. It's something I see around, like people that family of mine that went to university, got degrees, and just haven't been able to find jobs, but able to create opportunities for themselves online. A good friend of mine became a software developer and was doing projects for companies abroad. So really, I think for me, that passion around trying to bridge that gap for opportunities for young people and seeing the fact that with technology we could take that and kind of compete on a global level, and we could create opportunities for ourselves with quite sort of low barriers to entry. That's kind of where that passion for sort of tech and Africa comes from. And I think when I moved to London, one of the things that I saw here was a very established sort of technology sector. There's a lot of support for entrepreneurship. There's a lot of programs, free knowledge, a lot of mentorship programs. And I wanted to use the fact that I was based here. So I moved here with my husband and his job here. But really still my heart was very much around how can I to sort of make a difference in that space around sort of using technology to create opportunities, using technology for empowerment. So I started looking at how can I use the fact that I'm in London, that's this hub for innovation, for technology, where there is investment opportunities. How can I use the fact that I'm there to actually make that impact that I wanted to make, and establishing my own organization to do that is kind of was what I came up with, and that's how I ended up setting up ATBN.
And ATBN, in the beginning, I seem to remember the story that you just kind of put the idea out there and people flocked to your first event.
Yeah, so it started out by, first of all, it was just like, I wanted to find like-minded people. Because I was new in London. I only knew like my husband, his family, and a few of his friends. So it was really like, how am I going to find the right networks? How am I going to find people that are passionate about the same thing? And that, the quickest, easiest way I could think about was actually setting up an event. I remember my first event was, a small event, I think around 20 people. And that's how it started. Like there is such a I think an appetite for a different way to think about developing Africa, a way that is about enabling local solutions, a way that is about creating sustainable opportunities rather than kind of that shift from the traditional here's a solution, sort of transplanting solutions from the West. And I think that resonated with people, and I remember sort of showing people. We had speakers come in who were running businesses or who had worked in technology, and just seeing how much people were like amazed at the innovation and the solutions and the businesses that were being built by local innovators. And I think that really resonated with people, and they wanted to be a part of that and kind of support that, particularly with African diaspora as well. So first of all, just the change of narrative, the fact that we were coming in saying Africa is a hub for innovation. Africa is the next, big thing when it comes to markets for technology. Africa is adopting mobile technology faster than anywhere else in the world. Just the fact that we were running Africa events that had a completely different narrative and were showing opportunity and innovation, something that people really responded to and kind of just really took off from there.
And I know that with Her Future Africa, you focused in a bit on women, obviously, or a lot on women's empowerment in relation to tech. And also you've moved a bit into, what I would call kind of the development sector in terms of how you've resourced that work. Yeah. And so I'm interested about that, how that journey's been, sort of, going from tech to like something we call development,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I quickly realized was that for the bits that I'm passionate about was really how technology was being used to solve social problems.
Yeah.
And I realized there's actually a gap between sort of the development side and like the entrepreneurship tech sector side. So development didn't necessarily understand what was happening around technology because that was what they were, but then really seeing that being able to bridge that gap and connect the two would be super beneficial for both sides, because the entrepreneurs have the ideas, they have the local insights, they're able to create solutions that will actually solve this problem sustainably, while development, a lot of the time these organizations have that credibility, have that scale, have that they're across different markets, they might have access to government or influencers in a way that startups might not be able to access. So that's one thing I identified, that there is a need for people that can bridge that gap, particularly if we're going to see technology and innovation really playing a role in solving some of the key challenges. Because if you look at sort of tech, I guess in a way that it's funded here, when you look at it when it's funded by private sector, it's a very different kind of tech. It produces solutions that are not necessarily around solving social problems, or investors do want their return and they want it times X, 10, whatever, and they want it quickly, which may not be the approach when you're dealing with issues like access, giving people access to healthcare, giving people access to education. You might not be able to give that return as quickly. So really seeing that there is, and there continues to be a big role for development money to play. But again, understanding the challenges that development money has, the fact that, for example, in the UK, part of it is funded by public funds. So how do you take that and fund unproven solutions, give it to entrepreneurs who are trying out things that you're not yet sure if they'll work or not? And, and then the need for both sides to kind of understand and meet somewhere in between. And that's kind of one of the things that we were trying to do with our project, is kind of be that go-between where you kind of speak both languages. So that's kind of, I guess, what we're trying to achieve through projects like Her Future Africa, and where I really saw the opportunity for us as an organization to play a key role.
Let's just tell, or let me ask you a little bit more about Her Future Africa, just how it works, like operationally, what the project is. Because I think that's really interesting, thinking about it as a bridge, and it sort of makes me want to ask questions about, how the development sector might need to change to make that possible. But let's just zoom in on Her Future Africa first, and then come back out again.
Sure. So Her Future Africa is it's a acceleration program. So by that, we are taking young women that have ideas, and these are business ideas. So we want sustainable business ideas. We're really passionate about ideas that we want to help them use technology in their ideas. So they don't necessarily have to be tech-based. We try not to focus too much on the tech, because we think that can alienate people. We see it as the value we bring as the organization is to expose them to technology, to expose them to the tools, expose them to the networks they need to actually incorporate technology in their businesses. Sure. We support them with business skills, with mentorship. And we really, for Half Future Africa, we really focused in on businesses that would then have that multiplier effect. So businesses that were going to improve the lives of women and girls. So we wanted to kind of make, taking the idea that young women understand the issues that other women face within their local environment, and then they're supposed to be at the forefront of creating those solutions, and then surrounding them with the right support, the right networks, the right tools and skills to be able to actually develop their business ideas. And it runs through 6 months program that starts with a face-to-face boot camp, and then mentorship, and then kind of follow-on support from within their local networks as well as giving them access to international mentors. So that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
So it draws on the sort of tech models around and sort of an accelerator, and that sort of languaging and stuff, but it's very much directed towards the social good, right?
Yeah, and again, it was kind of that, the fact that we were focusing on social businesses are going to have a positive impact, but we were taking lessons from what had worked really well in terms of developing early stage ideas and getting them to the next stage. So, again, I guess in that role, to try and play that role we're talking about of being that bridge, taking best practice from both sides, and tying that into everything we do, including this program.
So doing that as that bridge, what did you learn about the development sector, and what do you think about it might need to shift or improve to make this kind of innovation possible? Because I think it's really exciting as someone who's been in the development sector for a long time to think about sort of the potential for ideas to come from people who really know what the problems are in these kinds of different ways. Because I think we've been relying on let's go have a focus group, or let's go sit with the community. What are the actual ideas that are there that we could actually be sort of encouraging in the way you describe?
So the funny thing is, as much as I have, as someone that has looked for looking for funding, and knowing how rigid the development sector can be, I actually in a way do understand where it's coming from in terms of money that has to be accountable, that people give with sort of certain ideas in mind on how it's going to be spent, right? And their fear on the backlash of if this funding ends up being completely, when private investors invest in startups, they kind of know maybe 1 in 20 will be a success. They understand that level of risk. I think that the level of risk for international development funds it's not that high. So I think for me, it's not really about saying, development center just needs to fund more, they need to do this. It's really, I try to wrap my head around and really understand on both sides what the constraints are. But I think there is a way that can happen, and it's innovation around funding, really. Because I think that even if you fund one early stage innovation and 20 and only one succeeds, there's so much learning in there that is beneficial for us, especially when we're applying that innovation to solving social challenges, that is going to be built on by the next people who will understand that problem much better, which is something that, repeating some of the old methods that are not really working actually. And so I think it's, first of all, innovating in the way that the funding is delivered. So, I know in the UK, there's really interesting innovation around funding of social services, things like social impact bonds, which is where you kind of pay, different people provide, so private investor fund provide the funding, and maybe the government pays back once, certain outcomes are met. There is innovation possible in the way that learning is delivered.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think there needs to be much more value attached to learning, and much more innovation where learnings are captured and shared. I mean, and I don't mean just writing up sort of impact report that no one's
going to read. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think right now one of the things that's broken is that people or organizations write those reports and capture those learnings for the funder.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like, you give me the money, I give you a report,
Yeah.
like that learning should be a learning for the sector, it should be a learning for the organization. And if there's a way we can really think about and create like a value economy around that information, I think would really catalyze that, because it means that it means that when development money goes in, it's not just going in to say, oh, we need to not waste it, we need to see a return, we need to see a solution work. Actually, it works if we learn XYZ, and if we're able to see how those learnings are then taken forward to help us understand this problem better and get closer to a solution.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing I would say is just, and I'm sure a lot of people have touched on this as well, I think it's the diversity in terms of the people that actually give the funding.
Mm-hmm.
Having just much more representation from people that are closer to the problem in terms of actually allocating, because having been through the process, sometimes people are asking you, like, people ask you things like, what is the solution? How do you know this is going to work? And you don't know it's going to work because
you've done it
before. It's like people want you to have this vision. It's a 3-year project, and I want you to say exactly what it is you're going to do and how it's going to work, and kind of prove that it's going to work. So I think that just the sector being much more open to learning and embracing failure, and also just, again, bringing in those different perspectives of people that are impacted by the problem in the process of that, I think is something that we need to definitely think about.
Yeah, what strikes me as you're talking is, the reason that people invest in tech startups and 20 of them don't work and one of them works is because they know that one that works will be important enough that it's worth it, right? Yeah. And also that maybe the learning, like you're saying, from the other 20, even if they don't work, is still a valuable thing. Potentially those people might go on to do something else that works better or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. And that said, it's I understand, like, I'm sort of proposing this and the fact that we need to think about, but I know it's not an easy thing to do, because failure in the social sector is not, like, if a startup fails and they lose investors' money or they lose users, that's, if they're not, but if you're working with vulnerable groups, what does that failure look like? What's the impact of that failure? We might advocate for, yes, embrace failure, but we need to think about what is the impact that you have, if certain projects in the social sector fail. So, I say that fully understanding that it's not something that can be done overnight, but I think it's just something that just needs to start shifting. And I think we just need to be much more innovative as a sector and saying this is a problem, and we kind of have to innovate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whilst you're right that, there are some different things to think about, I think that there is space for considerably more risk than currently tend to take, I would say.
Yeah. I was going to say, but also on the side of us as the people doing the social sort of impact organizations, I think we really need to think about scale. So ATBN is still, a really young organization. We're 2.5 years old, and one of the things we really had to think about is kind of what's our end goal. Like, we're small, we're based in the UK, and we're trying to create as much impact as we can, creating opportunities for young people and for women through technology in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we had to think about, for example, with Have Future Africa was like, does it make sense for us to be running Have Future Africa in Ghana, for example?
Mm-hmm.
It made sense for the pilot because obviously we wanted to make sure everything worked, we wanted to try out the model, the curriculum would be really hands-on, but really what we realized is we need to be an enabler. There are local organizations that provide that support and actually can be there supporting those entrepreneurs for much longer than we can. But they don't have access to the funders in the UK. They don't have access to a pool of international mentors. How can we be that catalyst that is empowering those local organizations? And I think that you kind of have to take that approach as an organization where it's not just about you and your existence. It's really about saying, what is the role that I can play? And it should be, you should be trying to play a different role than especially playing on your strengths. So for me, the strength again is that we are based in London, but we are Africa focused and in the world of tech in London and in Africa, that should be our focus and that should be our biggest value. And the rest, the operational bits and actually supporting entrepreneurs, that can be done locally. And actually, I should be empowering and building a capacity of local organizations to do that. So I think as social people working in the sector as well, we need to be able to be willing to think about that, and when I say that, I think that maybe in 5 years' time, if we've supported 15 organizations that are doing such a great job, maybe we don't need to exist anymore, thinking about in a way of like, what's your role? And it's not just about having an organization, but really I think we need to think more about scale. There's so much micro thinking, I think, as social people in the social sector.
Yeah. It's really interesting what you're saying, because I think that a few of the problems that I've seen over the years are around that. It's like organizations they might start small, they might start with an idea, and then they it becomes like, how does the organization survive? And I think that sometimes there's a questions about that, like, does the organization really need to survive, right?
Yeah, or is your mission done and you need to, be moving your resources and ideas to a new mission or
something, right?
Becoming just an enabler or, being that body of knowledge. There's a really, really good article, I think, in the, now I'm going to lose it, but it's called The End Game, and it's a I think I'm going to say Harvard Social Review, but put me that.
We'll find it.
Share the link after.
Yeah.
It's really eye-opening in terms of being honest with yourself as a social entrepreneur, as someone that is in the social sector, and say, am I still relevant? Am I really bringing value to the table, or is it justified to exist?
Yeah. One thing that I think is really interesting about your model is that it allows people from the countries where you work or the cities where you're doing the program, whatever, to sort of bring their ideas and then sort of being able to grow them. And I think one of the things that development generally struggles with is like figuring out what the actually good local ideas are, and like supporting things that will, that are innovative and might work and stuff. And I wonder about like how your model and what you do might kind of inject some change in that in some way, because I think particularly sort of established organizations tend to actually struggle to innovate around new ideas or find ways to sort of invite people to bring them to them or whatever. So I love that you did that, and I wonder what learning we might.
And I guess one thing, I guess, is where bringing this, like the diversity I talked about, the table. So the fact that I'm Ugandan, the fact that I have been a female entrepreneur in Africa, the fact that I have worked in tech in Africa means that the way I see it, it wasn't easy to get funding for Happy to Africa, because a lot of people wanted to know, what are the ideas that you're going to fund? What is the idea that's going to improve themselves? And I'm saying, I don't know what the ideas are. I know these amazing young people have ideas. And I think, so that's where, having that confidence, because I think, like you said, if you're sitting in if you've been part of a sector that, historically has been about, we know best and we kind of go in, like, you don't necessarily see it that way. And that's where bringing, bringing people like me being able to be in London, being able to be at those tables. I speak at a lot of social innovation conferences and forums now, just, bringing that unique perspective. And I guess it's a call out to people as well in the sector, other diaspora as well. Like, your voice, those experiences, those ideas we have do bring a different view and insight to the people. And so everything that we create. And I guess another thing as well is, even though, like I said, I'm all those things, I'm African, I'm an entrepreneur, I never assumed that I knew, like, this is a program. I still sort of go in, we co-innovated with our local partner in Ghana, because I know I'm from Uganda and it's not the same as in Ghana. So we really had to think about, when we were developing the curriculum, what would resonate, how do we tailor it so it makes more sense, and locally, what were some of the things we need to think about. So even when you're, kind of look like the people you're representing, you still have to have that humility to understand that it's not always, copy and paste. It's, we have to apply the same things we're always saying to the sector, like it's not copy and paste and everything. And then sometimes the risk that when it's you and you think, oh yeah, I'm African, so I now have all the like license to do the copy and pasting. Yeah, I really, because I'm so, like, I try to be an entrepreneur in Africa, and it's just the hardest thing. I mean, it's hard to be an entrepreneur anywhere, but honestly in Africa, so I have such a huge amount of respect.
Right.
And kind of like going in feeling like you can't waste people's time, people are, it's people's livelihoods, it's people really trying to make a future for themselves. So making sure that what we were able to provide was actually really useful and really beneficial, and just treating it as really seriously, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I was answering the question anymore.
I've forgotten what the question was now.
But yeah, it's something I'm really
Actually, I've remembered. Yeah, no, it was about how to bring, innovative ideas from people, for want of a better word, on the ground into development in different ways. And I think I sort of started by saying I think we're not very good at that generally.
Yeah.
I really like the way you talked about doing that, and then also the caution that, like, about copy and paste, which I really love that as a turn of phrase for it, because we're all really good at that. Like, oh, it worked there, so why wouldn't it work here?
Exactly. So I guess my answer in summary to that would be like a call to all the people that have that connection, that have that experience, to really just, I know it's not easy always to get into those spaces, but we have to get in there and kind of challenge things and bring those new ideas to the table. It's not always easy, but it has to be done.
Yeah, I want to actually sort of on maybe a slightly similar note, your book. I just wanted to mention the book, and just invite you to say something about it, and then maybe pick one or two stories from it to, shed a bit of light. Would be nice.
So Founding Women actually kind of built on, on top of Half Future Africa, because one of the things that the feedback we got from the young women who went through Half Future Africa program was that, the mentors being able to bring in other women that were the sessions that had actually run businesses, and they were able to ask them questions, and just really seeing someone that had been where they were with just an idea, and then make it was so important to them. It was something that people highlighted over and over again as kind of like the thing, one of the key things that they took away. And again, I'm always trying to think about how do we take that, how do we impact at scale? And that's how I started thinking about the book. First of all, part of our mission with the program is demystifying technology as this thing that's, I think there's a lot of people that have been brought up, particularly in Africa, engineering or technology is seen as this, male-dominated field. And we just wanted to demystify that. So I wrote up a collection of interviews. I interviewed 20 women from 13 different African countries, living in Africa, most of them, but also from the diaspora. Who are running businesses in tech. And I was very intentional in interviewing people that had different pathways into technology. So, those that had studied engineering or had done computer, to those that are running tech businesses. So one of them was a lady who actually started out in fashion. She doesn't have a tech background at all. She's running an energy tech startup, like tech as you can possibly get. Another one, again, no technology background, had worked a bit in health, but in health marketing, and is doing a really cool startup in Nigeria, called Blood Bank. Life Bank. She's called Temi, and she's just this incredible solution that is actually helping to save lives, because they find out what blood is at different blood banks. They know what's running short, and then when there is a need at a hospital, they literally put in a request, and Life Bank finds which locations have that blood available. They're able to collect it, do the logistics of actually getting it delivered, and because they're monitoring these supplies, they're able to see when see what the demand is for which types of blood are needed more, and therefore when the stocks are running low, like advise blood drives and get people to come and donate. So it's such an important piece of work that is needed not only in Nigeria, all of Africa. And just hearing her journey, the challenges, I was so inspired by this story. But you see someone doing something so incredible, and then you sit down with them and you realize, just like you, they saw a problem, and just like you, they didn't really have anyone sit down and tell them this is the answer and this is going to work. They've kind of had to go through all those moments of self-doubt. And I just thought putting a resource like that together, where young women could access that, and see the human stories behind some of these incredible businesses, but also just have role models to know it's actually possible. And there's a lot of conversations around balancing life and being an entrepreneur, conversations of when you walk into the boardroom and you're the CEO of this tech company, and everyone is have you walked into the wrong room? It's just Founding Women. Go get a copy and read it. Project very close to my heart, and I think that it's one of the things I'm really, really proud of. That first of all, that a book like that did not exist. So a collection of those stories of women that are running this businesses in technology, African women, didn't exist, and the fact that it does. So even if no one ever read it except me and my mother, I would have been very proud. Now that a few people have actually read it.
I've read it.
And loved it. Something that I think it just showcases African women and innovation and African entrepreneurship. The spirit in those stories really embody that, and it's something I'm really proud of.
And what I love about it, thinking about it from a sort of development sector kind of lens, is there's so much, I think, struggle in the sector around how do we communicate stories, and how do we communicate them in a way that is, essentially isn't poverty porn all the time. And your book is the antithesis of poverty porn to me. I mean, it's also not pictures, it's words, but and obviously, poverty porn, traditionally being just a certain kind of picture that invites people to give money. But I think there's so much capacity for positive stories, and they don't even have to be totally positive stories, but diverse stories. Actually, they could be bad stories, good stories, but stories that show much more depth and much more passion, and much more than a picture of a starving child could ever show, right? And I think there's something we can all learn from what you did there.
I have a question for you. I know you're done doing the interview.
That's okay. Turn the tables, it's fine.
No, but with that, actually, it's something that we kind of struggled with. So we did a crowdfunding campaign for the book, which was very successful. But we kept getting all this advice. So you need to make it more this, and you kind of basically saying we need to make it a bit more, I don't know, I guess, heartstring pulling in a way. We were going with a message of these women are amazing. This is about empowerment, and the book proceeds are going to actually help other young women set their businesses. Is there, is the issue? I feel like the sector has been a certain way for a long time. Responded to the images, and I don't know if the sector led to the image or the people responded and drove the sector. I don't know, but if that's what works, if that's what is working, is it something that can happen? Is it a change that can happen internally from the sector, or is it something a shift even just from the people that are giving and supporting and giving their attention, and now you're fighting for competition with cute kittens and puppies and all sorts of things? What's your view on that?
So my view is that But yeah. So clearly, people respond to heartstrings, and I think I think basically we have to kind of change, and people will just have to catch up, and it probably won't be easy. But I think that I personally think we've got a responsibility to do it differently, because I feel that what we're doing now is telling an inaccurate story, essentially, about the places where we work and the people that we work with, and whole basically nations and continents of people, presenting them as in a certain way. And I think that that's the opposite of what we're theoretically trying to do in development, right? I think it's actually actively against, you know, what most of us theoretically sign up for when we say we want to like address inequality. If we then use imagery that essentially promotes it, and that, for me, it's not okay. But I don't think it's like an easy, like you can just change it and everything will immediately work just as well in terms of fundraising. And maybe we can't fundraise like that anymore. Maybe organizations can't work like that anymore. Maybe we have to talk about things in a totally different way, and there are new models of funding and resourcing that look very different. But I think we just have to gonna have to take people with us, because I think that what we're doing is not fit for this era, if you know what I mean. Like so
when you were just saying, I was thinking the same. It's like knowing, you know, just because people react to it doesn't necessarily make it right, because it's like saying, you know, fear wins elections, right? If you can
exactly
people and kind of, you know, dig into that bit that people get scared and make others into other and stuff like that, yes, you will win the election. That's what people, they've responded, but it's not necessarily right or ethical. So I guess I was just comparing it to
that's such a good analogy, right?
Yeah.
So and it's actually a very similar thing, like othering and saying like these poor people over here, it might generate resources. Yeah, you can feed them. Right, exactly. It might generate resources, but it also compounds the structural problem from which the lack of resources, you know, is which is partly responsible for the lack of resources, which is about inequity in the world, essentially, right?
Yeah.
You know, on the most macro level. So I think we just have to do things differently. So that's why I love things like your book, because I think it's a start, and I get that it's hard to crowdfund for it, and I don't know the answer to that, but I do think that with technology, actually, with kind of the internet, it's going to become completely unsustainable anyway to be going, oh, these poor people in this place, you know, to sort of be presenting these others in our fundraising in that sort of way. And we're just going to have to get real about what it is we actually do. So we innovate, we experiment, sometimes it doesn't work, you know. We're not talking about places where everybody looks like they're poor and starving the whole time, you know. Get real about all of these things. And then, okay, so what's the role of trying to make the world a fairer place?
Yeah.
It's different from what you thought it was. And we have to educate people about that, you know.
Yeah. Well, trying to stay sustainable.
Yeah. I don't have all the answers. But I think actually the movement's really important to me. Like the movement really matters.
Yeah. And I think for me, the call to, is about throwing in there. I think for me, you know, the book, for example, Founding Women, was about sending out that message and knowing that everyone who picks it up will see Africa, will see African women. You know, I remember the initial ideas I had for like this. So I think that one of the opening, I think on the blurb of the book is like, you know, when you think about a tech entrepreneur, you know, who's going to come up with like the next wild innovation, who do you think about? And it's, you know, it's probably not an African woman. Like that's not the image that's coming to your mind. And hopefully that when people are done reading the book, it is a possibility. You read Temi's story, you read about Nile, who is doing, you know, she's doing med tech, designing prosthetics for people that have gone through breast cancer surgery and lost their limbs and things like that. And you know, something, hopefully a switch goes on and you think, and you think differently. And now when you think African woman, you don't only think about like the woman with a pot on her head and the, I don't know, kid on her back.
Kid on her back, yeah.
You know, you think entrepreneur, tech, as well. And so I think it's these little things we have to do.
And we're all going to have to do them, and a lot of them for that to actually shift, I think, is basically what I think in answer to your question. And in the meantime, we might not raise as much money, and I don't exactly know what we do about that, but it does just feel like important movement. And I think probably, we have to persuade people to fund those initiatives, to tell different stories as well, and there are people doing that a bit, but I think it's one of those interesting ones that, like, lots of people resonate with the thought, but the actual practice of doing it, we still lag behind on. It's a bit like we all think that it's a good idea to listen to what people really want and need, but a lot of the time our practice doesn't really do that properly. And it's a bit like that. It's like lots of people resonate with the idea that we have to show a different picture, but don't quite
And I think that's another thing, back to the question about what can the development sector do differently. I think there's just a need for those intermediary like organizations so that are understanding, what is the best way for us to communicate this. And this is the challenge, is a lot of the funding wants to fund like direct programs. They want to fund programs. No one wants to fund the stuff that is around making those programs effective. That is work in itself. You may not be able to, like communication agencies, people that are, like us, that are enabling other organizations. For me, my dream would be to actually be able to just be the enabler. But a lot of the time, the funding is like they want you to be able to do the project and do it on the ground. So, investing in development of people working in development is not something that, again, how do you tell your funders or whoever funds the funders as well that, this is around building our people, building their skills, there's just not enough of investment going into actually the stuff that can figure out the innovation around how we make this work and what are the new ways of doing this. And the organizations that are trying to do that. And I guess a lot of people will have shared this as well, but even for you running an organization, for that core funding to allow you to again, build those skills, build that, I think I was quite lucky with my funding that I got for Have Reach Africa. We had quite a bit of it that was towards actually building us up as an organization. Not a lot of funders do that. But it needs to be more, we got a fund once, and actually it was a private sector fund. And it was a fund it was literally for us to get an idea. We pitched a project that we wanted to do, and this fund was only towards doing understanding if it would work. So really going out and speaking to people on the ground and collecting and seeing what they wanted to see as how we changed from what we had to how we refine the idea. And the funding specifically go out, understand if your project's actually going to work, and then speak to people on the ground and change it. And that's something I've never seen in development. Before you give someone 3 years funding, give them a pot to say, go and speak to people, collect insights, come back and see and let us know, what's changed, what you've learned, and how it's actually going to market. Just something like that is something that we could definitely learn. And the fact it's telling that it was available in private sector money, obviously not in development money, but
it feels like a theme. And I have seen a few pots of money for research and development over the years, but I definitely think it's a big gap, and there's not enough money like that around. And it's interesting because, again, like as you bring it back to the fact that it's there in the private sector, and it's there for a reason, because they think that helps. Because ultimately the goal in the private sector is to make more money, and they still put money to those things because they think it helps.
Exactly. And it was so interesting that when we came back with ours, we'd kind of really changed, because we realized what we were doing was actually in the long term not going to work. We needed to sort of go even further in terms of back a step. The problem and for them that was music to their ears, because it meant that they could have then given project money to a project that wasn't going to work in the first place. But that said, I think also within the development sector, so the people, the organizations that are being given these skills, we need to have those tools. Like there's all these, so with this funding, you know, they had methodologies that they gave us around, you know, human-centered design and, you know, support around actually using those tools to learn. It wasn't like a box ticking exercise of go out and speak to a bunch of people, come back and report. There was actually a process to it, and there's all these tools that we just need to learn and incorporate as well as practitioners in this space. Because I think, again, some people have this, you know, in development or in the social sector kind of think of private sector as a whole other world, you know, but there's a lot of tools that we can learn and we can apply on how to innovate and do our work differently.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love the way that you described doing that in Her Future Africa, you know, using the kind of tech accelerator thing and stuff, and just, you know, utilizing that to bring ideas up. So I hope you're going to continue doing that in future, and I look forward to seeing the great ideas that hopefully will come out of that. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Eunice. It's been great talking to you.
Really, really good. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
You've been listening to me, Marianne Clements, in conversation with Eunice Baguma Ball, and this is the Healing Solidarity Conference. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to spend a little bit more time with the ideas and suggestions we discussed in this talk, or any of the others in the Healing Solidarity Conference, don't forget you can make a contribution to support the production of this conference and get access to recordings and ongoing conversations about these themes and ideas. Just click the link below this video to find out more. Thank you.